Thank you all so much. It's a pleasure to be back here. And I just appreciate the sunshine and everything you set up for me today. This is wonderful. So there are many pathways that we can take, right? We have a variety of steps along the way. Ultimately, though, we have to make a choice, even if we don't really want to. We get to choose. We get to choose a path of worry and frustration, anxiety and distraction and all those things that just don't feel good. Or you could call that a path of fear. Or we can choose a path of fearlessness, and you could call that a path of love. Hi, Rose. So the path of fear is based on the belief of scarcity. There isn't enough, you name it. There isn't enough money, there isn't enough goods, there isn't enough patience, tolerance, there isn't enough acceptance. There isn't enough security. There isn't enough confidence. Can you relate to any of these? I know I can. So people are fighting for their needs to get met, right? Got to find that money, got to hold on to it, all these things that we feel like we're lacking. A path begins to roll out before each one of us based on our choice. Dr. Gerald Jampowski wrote the book, Love is Letting Go of Fear. You've probably all seen that book. It's been around a while. It's based on the lessons from A Course in Miracles. He says, we don't seem to be able to change the world, to change other people, to change ourselves. Many of us, myself included, he said, have felt the futility of trying to rid ourselves of frustration, conflict, and illness while still trying to hold on to the old belief system. So we know what doesn't work, right? The good news is we can choose the path of fearlessness. It's really simple. It just isn't always easy. So fear shows up in a variety of ways. Think of all the ways we are expressing and feeling our fear. Anxiety is fear. Worry, judgment, and criticism. Feeling alone. There's a new release put out by the Surgeon General not very long ago that I'd seen recently that that we have an epidemic. This crisis of loneliness, isolation, and lack of connection. Even before COVID-19 began, he said that over 50% of adults related to that disconnection, that over 50% of the adults were talking about fear, isolation, and reported experiencing measurable levels of loneliness. Isn't that kind of sad that, you know, in a time when it should be so much easier, we have all our devices, we're connecting all the time, and yet people are still experiencing so much loneliness. And it can create some serious challenges. He wrote in his release that he put out that it's like smoking a pack a day of cigarettes is the harm that it's causing us to live in this kind of pain of isolation and loneliness. Panic attacks are much more common for kids as well as adults. Anger and frustration are increasing, which all you have to do is turn on the news every night to see how that's showing up. And fear, we realize, is an underlying experience of anger. Stress and worry become a reason for coping with things like alcohol and drugs and whatever other kinds of things we do to kind of help ourselves cope. My granddaughter several years ago started having panic attacks. And they just came on, and she was at school, and the school district would call the ambulance and they'd take her to the hospital and they'd give her some drugs to calm her down. Well, after this happened several times, finally a nurse said to her, this isn't going to work to keep doing this. And she had no control over it. So one day I worked at the school district at the time, and I was at the high school, and she was taken into the office at the front building, and they called me in. So I thought, we're going to do something different here. I said, I just want you to listen to me. Just listen to my voice, and I'm going to count. I just want you to focus on that. And I started counting, kind of meeting her where she was at. And then I kept slowing it down a little bit more and a little bit more. In less than 5 minutes, it was completely under control again. Took her a little longer to kind of be able to show up back at school, but that's all it took. It was a connection with her that I had that we could work through that. And so it's kind of an interesting way to experience how easy it can be to change this once we're aware. Well, this belief system hasn't been working that we seem to keep trying to work with. A Course in Miracles says, the ego believes that power, understanding, and truth lie in separation. Well, my understanding is separation is where all the trouble began. We have the basic fear is a fear of separation, and it shows up in everything else. And the things that we've talked about this morning that really remind us that we have never been separated is kind of a real path back to out of that fear. We come into this world as babies, relying on adults to help us find our way into this truth. But our adults have so often been caught up in all of it and injured and hurt that many of our children are growing up in conflict and abuse and fear. So now we have another whole generation who are, dosed in all the fear. If we are looking to our thinking to make it differently, I don't think it's going to work, because once we've got those thoughts going, they seem to just kind of keep themselves going again and again and again, don't they? We just see the same things happening again and again. Gerald Jampolsky writes, we all manufacture our own dust and static, which serves only to interfere with seeing, hearing, and experiencing love within ourselves and with others. This self-imposed interference keeps us stuck in our old belief system that we use repeatedly, even though it doesn't get us what we want. Well, in 2015, I sat at my kitchen table writing the eulogy for my daughter for her celebration of life that was coming up. She had experienced this self-imposed interference that Jampolsky writes about, and alcohol became her way of dealing with it. So at 36 years old, she made her transition with complications from alcohol. My friend Lori that evening had sent me an email as I was sitting there at the table with a link to a TED Talk called Everything We Know About Addiction is Wrong. And I stopped what I was doing and turned that on. It was about 14 minutes long. The person giving this TED Talk was Johann Hari from Britain. And he shared about his own family members that he had experienced as a child who had addiction. And he wondered, what is causing this? Why is this happening? He wanted to find out the real cause of addiction. So he ended up traveling over 30,000 miles around the world, sitting with people who had different kinds of answers to share with him. And some of those answers are astounding. He's gone on to write books and do some really interesting work. And at the time that this came out, I thought, why didn't I see this 6 months ago? Because he had just done it a few weeks before. So it was happening at the same time I was going through this experience with my daughter. So he met Bruce Alexander, who's a professor of psychology in Vancouver in British Columbia. And he shared about an experiment that had been done in the 70s, where they took a rat and put it in a cage. They put 2 bottles of water. One was laced with heroin. And so the rat would go to that heroin continuously until it died. So this experiment was done several times, and it seemed to always be the solution to, so there it is. There's our proof that that's what happens. If you're offered this drug substance, that's what you're going to do. But Professor Alexander said, well, there's something kind of wrong with this situation. All that rat had was a cage. There was nothing else but the cage and the 2 bottles of water there. He said, so let's try something different. And he created what he called Rat Park. And in Rat Park, it was a heaven for rats. They had lots of other rats. They had good food, lots of cheese to nibble on, and they had things to play with. It was just, they were happy little rats. We use rats a lot to experiment for how we do. So they still, but in this Rat Park, there was still 1 bottle of water and 1 bottle of water laced with heroin. The rats almost never chose the bottle with heroin, and it never impulsively, and never killed themselves with it. So we went from 100% of doing themselves in to 0%. That's some good information. So when they had happy, connected lives, they didn't choose to self-destruct. Harry says that human beings have an innate need to bond. And if we don't have healthy relationships to bond with each other, we'll find another way to bond, because it's just one of the needs that we have. The system in our country and in Britain has made drugs illegal. And so the people who have gotten caught up in this whole situation and have chosen to use drugs to try to artificially bond now become convicts or criminals. And one story he shared in there was in Phoenix, Arizona. He was out there one time, and here are women who have been in jail because they were arrested with around drug and alcohol charges. And they have to wear a shirt that says, "I'm an addict," and they're out cleaning things up. So people go by and jeer at him and this kind of thing. So now we've added shame and insult. So that creates more isolation. So somehow this system just has not been working. I don't have to tell you that. We all know that it's just not working. The war on drugs that started with Mrs. Reagan just hasn't seemed to be the answer. So Johann Hari, that did this talk, also shared that in Portugal, they were having such an intense situation with drugs and alcohol that they brought experts all together and they said, we've got to do something, make a decision here. What are we going to do? So these experts looked over all of the research and the material, and they decided to legalize all drugs. And you probably all have heard about that. This happened years ago. But the crucial difference that they did make was they took everything that they'd been spending on disconnecting, on going after people who were using drugs and putting them in jail and all these different things. They decided that they would use all that money to help them have a reason to get up in the morning. They gave them micro loans so that they could start businesses. They paid employers part of the wages to bring them into work so that every person had a reason to get up in the mornings. And this worked so well. Johann Hari had been out and had, in his research, he had talked with some of the people that had been helped with this program. And they said that over time, getting out of bed, getting at something every day, they began to reconnect with society at large. They had a purpose and a reason and a way to reconnect. It worked so well that, this was in 2015, so several years ago that I saw this. But he said within 15 years at that time, the drug abuse dropped 50%. It was such a good outcome that nobody wanted to go back to the old system. So that connection piece was pretty important. After all of his travels to learn about addiction, Johann said, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Connection is love. It works. That's what we're looking for. So here is the path to fearlessness. The antidote to fear is connection. Gerald Jampolsky writes, although love is what we really want, we are often afraid of love. We begin to experience, yet as we help each other let go of fear, we begin to experience a personal transformation. All around us, we can find the symptoms of fear. We need to pay attention to those symptoms because they're giving us information that we need. That information is stuff that we need. If you have an injury, that pain is going to tell you where that injury is and what to do about it. So we need that to make the changes that bring connection instead of fear. So we start with the symptoms in your own life. Do they tell you something about the fears that you are facing? And how can you put them to rest? What are the symptoms we see in our family and our community? And what are the symptoms we see in society? These symptoms may be showing up as the very things that scare us, and yet it's the information we need to see to make the change that needs to happen here. Our path to fearlessness takes a commitment to clear out those memories of fear from the past and get very present in this moment, which we all know is the only moment we have right now. So what can we do about it? We can decide what we are going to practice. We can continue to practice fear, or we can change that practice to things that reconnect us to each other and to love, to practicing love with ourselves. Practice of affirmations that bring a new, fearless way to see things like some of the things that Gerald Japolsky wrote in his book. I am determined to see things differently. This instant is the only time there is. And I could see peace instead of this. That's a good one to have in your back pocket. You're out on the freeway driving down the road. I could see peace instead of this. You can practice meditation regularly. I know lots of people, and I'm sure many of you are practicing meditation, but I know lots of people think, just can't stop my brain from thinking. That's because brains were designed to think. We're not supposed to stop it from thinking, but we can sit down and be calm. And if you need help, there's a lot of different ways to meditate. I have found things on YouTube, and I have an app on my phone that I do in the morning that just kind of gets things started, and then I can go from there. So find a way that works for you, anything, 5 minutes to start with, anything that works. It's really worth it, and you'll be surprised how quickly you see the difference in using meditation. And we can use a prayer chaplain or a practitioner with CSL, where you can move through fear working with someone who has been trained and knows how to support you with that. Take our prayer chaplain up on going in that room and having prayer time with him. And that can really help us overcome fearlessness. I just had a session with a practitioner on Wednesday, and I couldn't believe what a difference that hour with her made in my life. So it's a really nice thing to practice. So living your life without fear makes room for the things in your life that matter to you. Dr. Japolsky says, as we help ourselves and each other let go of fear, we begin to experience that personal transformation. We start to see beyond our old reality and as defined by the physical senses, and we enter a state of clarity, where we discover that all minds are joined, that we share a common self, and that inner peace and healing and love are in fact all that is real. Isn't that something to think about? Imagine experiencing life that way. Isolation and loneliness don't need to be our experience. That's why this path to fearlessness is so important. When we do it for ourselves, we change not only our own experience, but we change the ability for others to do it for themselves as well, because we are all connected. Everything we do has an effect on the others around us. And incredibly, we help them find their way to fearlessness too. I like finding things to watch that express our connection with each other, because there's so many things on TV. If you get into any of that news and things, you can find so much of the divisiveness. But if there are some things, I like to watch America's Got Talent and Britain's Got Talent, and it's amazing how I am moved to tears so often watching this, because people really connect. The audience watches this person come up in fear to do this audition. And then some of the most extraordinary things happen, and the audience just connects with them and supports them. It's just amazing to watch some of these things. A couple of years ago, a woman by the name of Jane, who went by Nightbird when she sang, auditioned on America's Got Talent. I don't know if any of you saw that audition. Very thin young woman with really short hair. And they asked, the judges asked about her life, and she said, and what kind of work she'd been doing. And she said, well, I haven't really been working because I've been dealing with cancer. And oh, wow. So Simon Cowell asked her, well, how are you doing now? And she responded, well, the last time I checked, I had some cancer in my lungs and in my spine and in my liver. And Howie Mandel said, so you're not okay? And she said, well, not in every way, no. But she said, it's so important that people know that I'm so much more than the bad things that are happening to me. She had such an impact that day. She said, you can't wait until life isn't hard anymore to be happy. She went on to share her song that she had written, that was a beautiful song about the experience that she'd had. And she was given the golden buzzer because she'd made such an impact. The song was beautiful, and she just, made such an impact. The judges connected with her. The audience connected with her. There was just a feeling of love happening with that. She wasn't able to actually go through the competition because of her health, and she did pass away about 1.5 years later, I think it was. But in the meantime, she had made such an impact with the courage to share her story and her song. And just recently, I saw a group of of young people from South Africa who were in a group that was started by a couple who had their car had been hijacked by young people. And so they started this program for young people to have something positive. And these young students put together an audition and came to America's Got Talent from South Africa. And it was just beautiful. If you get the chance to watch it, look them up. And they sang the song that Jane had sang. And danced to it. It was just so moving. There wasn't a dry eye in the house because everybody knew where that song came from. And so these kids had been inspired. They said they were so inspired by her story and her song. Here they are from South Africa. So we are making an impact on people around the world. And here these kids are sharing it with us just beautifully. We can all live our lives without fear. Let's jump on this path of fearlessness with connection as love. We can do this together, and we will have a life that feels really good. Gabor Mate said, "Safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection." Isn't that just so cool? So let's go ahead and go into meditation. You just close your eyes and just kind of hold all this energy we've been sharing. And take a nice, slow, cleansing breath. And just hold it for a second or two before you release it. And then let's do that one more time. Just one more long, slow, cleansing breath, and hold it, and then release it. And then one more, and this time when you release that breath, let everything that might interfere with your peace go out with that breath. Let's just open our heart now and feel the freedom of fearlessness. Breathe into your heart. Just let that feeling expand. Let love just run through your whole being. We are one with the source of love. We really cannot be disconnected from this love. No separation has ever happened. As we walk this path of fearlessness, we start to experience that connection easier and easier. What are the symptoms of fear you see in your life, your family and community, or in society? Just breathe into your heart and let love dissolve those symptoms into connection. Just imagine what connection looks like in this world right now. There's nothing too small and nothing too large to be useful. So let's just take a minute to sit in silence. And let the love of God move through me now. I remember that I am always in connection with this love. I am loved and I am loving. All is well in my life as I walk a path of fearlessness. And so it is. Amen.